We have recently been through the Christmas season, which is about the birth of Jesus. So one might ask, did Jesus really exist? Was there ever such a person who lived in history? This is the question, and we will now endeavour to answer it. Firstly, we notice that there are two historians in the ancient world who mention Jesus as a historical person. First, there are the writings of a Roman historian and senator named Tacitus. He wrote around AD 116, and after describing the Great Fire of Rome, which destroyed most of the city in AD 64, he says that the Emperor Nero tried to blame the Christians for the fire. He said, consequently, to get rid of the report that Nero had started the fire, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. This reference to Christians and to Christ could hardly have been inserted by Christians in later times, as it is expressed with such a pronounced anti-Christian sentiment. Next, there is the Jewish historian Josephus, who mentions Christ in two places in his Antiquities of the Jews, written around AD 93 to 94. We'll read first of all a short passage from Book 20. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges, and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. This reference to Jesus is rather incidental, hence this passage is good evidence for the historicity of Jesus Christ. The other passage in which Josephus refers to Jesus Christ is much more extended. It says in Book 18, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Modern scholars reject this passage, claiming that it is a later addition by Christians. It is just too glowing a report to have been written by Josephus, they say, and they may be right. There are a large number of other possible allusions to Jesus Christ in the writings of ancient authors. Wikipedia has collected them together in an article entitled Sources for the Historicity of Jesus. We will note just one of these additional sources. Sometime after AD 70, a man by the name of Mara bar Sapion wrote a letter to his son, in the course of which he said, "What else can we say when the wise are forcibly dragged off by tyrants, their wisdom is captured by insults, and their minds are oppressed and without defence? What advantage did the Athenians gain from murdering Socrates? Famine and plague came upon them as a punishment for their crime. What advantage did the men of Samos gain from burning Pythagoras? In a moment their land was covered with sand. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of hunger, the Samians were overwhelmed by the sea, and the Jews, desolate and driven from their own kingdom, live in complete dispersion. But Socrates is not dead because of Plato. Neither is Pythagoras because of the statue of Juno, nor is the wise king because of the new law he laid down. The wisdom of Socrates lives on in the writings of his pupil Plato. Juno was a widely revealed female goddess in the Roman world. The statue of her at Samos was particularly significant at that time, and hence was linked to Pythagoras in the above letter. The reference to the new law of the wise king evidently refers to Jesus' statement about a new commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. We will now consider the matter of physical remains. Today there is a place that is revered as the empty tomb of Jesus. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built over it, but is that an evidence of Jesus' existence? Not really. We cannot be sure that it was his tomb. The best we can say for it is that at some time in the past, someone believed it was his tomb. That person was Helena, the mother of the Roman Emperor Constantine, who was sent by Constantine after his conversion to Christianity. She set out to find the tomb, but we do not know if she got it right. However, there is in existence today another object which is of importance in regard to the reality of Jesus' existence. It is a linen cloth. We note first that a linen cloth is mentioned in the Gospels. And when Joseph had taken the body of Jesus, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock, and rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre and departed. There is such a linen cloth that now exists. It is called the Shroud of Turin. It is kept at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin in northern Italy. How they came to have this cloth is another story. Instead, we will look at the markings that are on the cloth. Here we see the full extent of this linen cloth. It is 14.5 feet long. Some person was laid on the left-hand end of the cloth with their head to the middle. The cloth was then folded back over the entire length of the body. What we now see is an image of the back of the person and an image of their front. There is a gap between the two images, which is evidently the distance from the front to the back of the head. During the course of its history, the cloth has been badly damaged both by fire and water. However, the main areas of the images can still be clearly seen. One of the first questions that comes to mind is this: is this the work of some clever artist? The answer is no, for the following reason. When photography was first invented, it was desirable to preserve pictures of the shroud. When this was done, an amazing thing was discovered. Some of you would remember the days when your cameras produced negatives and you had to take these to get printed. Here is the part of the shroud showing the head and face of the image. This is what showed up in the negative of this same image. Instead of a rather weird picture of a face, we have a virtually normal face to look at. So the image on the shroud is actually a negative of a normal facial image. No artist could have produced such an image before photography was invented. This shows that the image is real. It was produced by someone being wrapped in the linen. With that much established, we will now look more closely at the details of the image's front and back that we have before us. Firstly, we note that there is no sign of decay. The linen was wrapped around the body for only a short while, or decay would have begun and the linen would have been destroyed as a result. Next, we notice that the image is that of a crucified person. There are wounds in the hands and in the feet. Moreover, the blood flow down the forearms agrees with the angle that those arms would have made on the cross. It dribbles down the arms, then runs off toward the side where the little finger is. Now here is a remarkable thing. Every picture that I have seen of the crucifixion shows the nails going through the palms of the hands. The shroud shows that this is not correct. The nails went through the wrists. Do you see that? Who was this crucified person? Are there any other details that lead us to an identification? Look at the forehead. There are small blood flows that have run down the forehead. The Gospels record that Jesus received wounds to the head. And when they had plaited a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him, and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head. Was Jesus the only person that was treated in this way before he was crucified? Maybe there were others, but it is beginning to look rather suspicious. This may be the linen cloth mentioned in the Gospels. When we look at the image of the back, we see that there is more blood around the back of the head. Maybe the blood flows did come from a crown of thorns being driven into his head. If we look closely at the back and the backs of the legs, we can see that this crucified man has been terribly scourged. The enlarged area of the back allows us to see these scourge marks more clearly. This also agrees with what is recorded in the Gospels. Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Matthew 27:26. Christians believe that this scourging was a fulfillment of the prophecy in Isaiah. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, and the chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Isaiah 53:5. Now when we return to view the front image, there is one more characteristic that makes the identification certain. The cloth that we have been looking at is the one in which Christ was wrapped. The Gospel of John records that the soldiers came to break the legs of the three who were crucified, but they found that Jesus was already dead. To make sure of this, one of the soldiers used a spear to pierce the heart of Jesus. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came there out blood and water. John 19:34. This highly unusual circumstance is graphically recorded on the shroud. The wound and the flow of blood and water can be clearly seen even though it was almost obliterated by the damage to the shroud. Here it is magnified so that you can see it a little better. Could there be more concrete, objective proof of the existence of Jesus Christ? I doubt it. But not only does this establish his existence, it also tells us of his sufferings. Our investigation thus far has confirmed the gospel accounts of the death of Jesus. What do these accounts say concerning Jesus while he was alive? We find here the story of a man totally unlike any other. Nothing in the literature of mankind can compare with it. Neither the plays of Shakespeare nor the founders of other religions came up with anything like his story. He was strong, he was a carpenter, he was a builder. Yet in his dealings with others, he was so gentle. When he was talking to the Samaritan woman at the well of Sychar, he first of all aroused her interest. Then he said, "Go, call thy husband and come hither." Jesus credited her with having a husband, even though he knew very well what he later revealed. "For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband." The woman immediately observed, "Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet." This was not the only occasion when Jesus revealed that he knew more than was obvious. Perhaps the most startling of these instances was his prediction that Peter would deny him. But Peter said unto him, "Although all should be offended, yet will not I." And Jesus said unto him, "Verily I say unto thee that this day, even in this night, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice." Mark 14:29 and 13. This was dramatically fulfilled as recorded in Mark 14 verses 66 to 72 and in other Gospels. So marked was this characteristic of Jesus that John felt impelled to write, "Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, in the feast day, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself unto them, because he knew all men, and needed not that any should testify of man, for he knew what was in man." He knew all men, he knew what was in man, John said. This is a truly godlike quality. Notice the above quote mentions the miracles which he did. There were lots of them, more than are recorded of any other person in history. Ultimately, they were the means of his undoing. Many of them are described, but most are just referred to with words such as we've just read. Concerning these miracles, the Gospel of John states, "Many of the people believed on him and said, When Christ cometh, will he do more miracles than these which this man hath done?" Even the Jewish leaders recognized that Jesus performed many miracles. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called the council together and said, "What should we do? This man is working a lot of miracles." That's from the Contemporary English version. However, he never performed his miracles just for show. He was once resisted the temptation to do just that, as we read in Matthew 4:5-7. Perhaps the most spectacular miracle of Jesus was when he walked on water, but he did not do it just to show off. The disciples were in trouble and Jesus needed to get to them. I suppose he could have flown through the air, but he chose to walk on the water. The story is recorded in Matthew 14:24-32. As if all that was not enough, Jesus claimed to have other powers that differed from those of normal men. For instance, he claimed the authority to be able to forgive sin. The following story is told in 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke. We will read it from Mark chapter 2, beginning at verse 3. And they came unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press, they uncovered the roof where he was. And when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, Why does this man speak blasphemies? Who can forgive this sins but God only? And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, Why reason ye these things in your heart? Whether is it easier to say to the sick of the palsy, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise and take up thy bed and walk? But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins, he saith to the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise and take up thy bed, and go thy way into thine house. And immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went forth before them all, insomuch that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, We never saw it on this fashion. On this occasion, Jesus not only claimed that he had the authority to forgive sins, he worked a miracle specifically to prove that he had that right. Yet, as the Jews rightly reasoned on that occasion, who can forgive sins but God only? Was Jesus making a claim to deity on that occasion? Are there any other similar instances? Yes, there are. On one occasion he claimed to have the ability to raise the dead. He said, Just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, in the same way the Son gives life to those he wants to, in the Good News Bible. There are a number of other remarkable claims in the context of the above passage. On several occasions, Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection on the third day. For example, Matthew says, And shall deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify him, and the third day he shall rise again. Matthew 20:19. Did this really happen? The shroud testifies that it did. There were no signs of decay. What else could have happened that so changed the course of history? Something changed the disciples. Instead of cringing in fear, they went forth at the peril of their lives to proclaim the story of the resurrected Christ. It was claimed that they had turned the world upside down. Jesus predicted that his story would be preached in every part of the world. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. And so it has happened. The story of the life and death of Jesus is being preached in every corner of the world. And when people realize that Jesus died for their sins, it changes their lives. It changed my life, and it will change yours too, dear friend.